In the basement of a porcelain factory in Krakow, Poland, a German businessman sat at his desk writing names in careful handwriting. Heinrich Weber, millionaire industrialist and member of the Nazi Party, was creating a document that would either save 1,200 lives or get him executed for treason. Each name on that list represented a choice between profit and conscience, between survival and humanity. Welcome to Vaulted Secret Stories. Before we begin this extraordinary tale of moral awakening, hidden heroism, and the power of one man's conscience to change everything, tell me in the comments, what would you risk to save someone you barely knew? And if you believe stories of courage in humanity's darkest hour deserve to be remembered, hit that subscribe button. This is the story of how a war profiteer became one of history's greatest secret heroes. Heinrich Weber had never been particularly concerned with morality. Born into wealth in Zwickau, he'd built his fortune through shrewd business deals, political connections, and an uncanny ability to be in the right place at the right time with the right amount of money. When Germany invaded Poland in 1939, Weber saw opportunity where others saw tragedy. "The Jews will need to work," he told his business partner over dinner at the exclusive Deutscher Hof Hotel in Krakow. "And I will need workers." It's a simple equation. Weber wasn't anti-Semitic in the rabid ideological sense. He was simply indifferent. Jews, Poles, Germans, they were all potential labor sources to him. What mattered was profit margin, production quotas, and keeping his factories running efficiently enough to secure lucrative government contracts. He established Weber Porcelain Works in a confiscated Jewish-owned factory, reasoning that the previous owners no longer had need of it. The location was perfect, close to the newly established Krakow ghetto, which provided an endless supply of cheap, desperate workers who would accept starvation wages rather than face the alternative. Weber's approach was methodically practical. He hired Samuel Rosen, a former Jewish accountant, to manage the books and handle the complexities of dealing with both Nazi bureaucracy and the Jewish workers. Rosen was thin, intellectual, and possessed the kind of quiet dignity that made Weber slightly uncomfortable in ways he couldn't quite articulate. "Mr. Weber," Rosen said during their first meeting, "these people are skilled craftsmen, professionals, teachers. They're not just laborers. They're workers," Weber replied curtly. "That's all I need them to be?" The factory was profitable from the start. Weber produced porcelain dinnerware for Wehrmacht officers, decorative pieces for Nazi functionaries, and practical items for the war effort. The Jewish workers were efficient, desperate to prove their usefulness, and motivated by the knowledge that employment at Weber's factory meant exemption from the random deportations that were beginning to empty the ghetto. Weber lived well during those early years. His apartment overlooking the Vistula River was luxuriously furnished with art confiscated from Jewish homes. He drove a black Mercedes, ate at the finest restaurants, and counted high-ranking SS officers among his social circle. The war, for Heinrich Weber, was extraordinarily good business. But success came with complications. Oberfuhrer Erich Hartmann was assigned as the regional administrator, overseeing Jewish labor assignments. Hartmann was everything Weber was not, a true believer, a man who saw the systematic destruction of European Jewry not as a means to an end, but as an end in itself. Tall, blond, and possessed of the kind of casual cruelty that made even Weber uncomfortable, Hartmann enjoyed his work in ways that Weber found disturbing. "Your Jews are too comfortable, Weber," Hartmann observed during one of his regular inspections. "They work, yes, but they don't fear. Fear increases productivity." Weber nodded noncommittally, but privately he disagreed. His workers were productive precisely because they weren't terrorized into paralysis. They had hope, the hope that good work might mean survival. It was during one of these inspections that Weber first noticed Clara Rosen, Samuel's teenage daughter. She was perhaps 17, with dark hair and intelligent eyes that seemed too old for her face. She worked in the painting department, carefully decorating porcelain pieces with steady hands, despite the chronic malnutrition that was becoming visible in all the workers. "That one," Hartman said, pointing at Clara. "She's attractive. I might have use for her." Something cold settled in Weber's stomach. "She's one of my best workers. I need her here." Hartman smiled, and Weber realized he'd made a mistake. Showing interest in protecting any individual worker was dangerous. It suggested sentiment, which was weakness. "Of course," Hartman said smoothly. "But you know, Weber, these Jews are only temporary. Soon they'll all be relocated to more appropriate facilities. You should prepare for that transition." That night, Weber couldn't sleep. He found himself thinking about Clara Rosen's hands as she painted delicate flowers on porcelain cups, about her father's quiet dignity, about the way the workers had gradually become individuals to him rather than simply labor units. When had that happened? When had he started seeing them as people? The answer would cost him everything he thought he valued and save everything that actually mattered. The transformation didn't happen overnight. Weber later described it as being like slowly awakening from a dream, where things that had seemed normal gradually revealed themselves to be nightmarish. The first crack in his moral numbness came when 7-year-old David Goldstein was shot by a guard for the crime of being too small to reach his workstation properly. Weber watched from his office window as the child's body was dragged away like refuse, and something fundamental shifted inside him. It was an efficiency issue, Hartman explained when Weber asked about the incident. Small children slow down production. Better to eliminate the problem early. He was 7 years old. He was Jewish, Hartman replied, as if that explained everything. That night, Weber sat in his luxurious apartment, surrounded by stolen art and Nazi memorabilia, and realized he was complicit in something monstrous. The comfortable distance he'd maintained between business and brutality had evaporated. These weren't just workers. They were human beings, and they were being systematically murdered. The second revelation came when Weber witnessed a deportation. 300 workers from a nearby factory were loaded onto cattle cars bound for what the SS called resettlement in the East. Weber watched families torn apart, children separated from parents, elderly people beaten for moving too slowly. Samuel Rosen stood beside him, tears streaming down his face. "My sister was in that group," Rosen said quietly. Weber said nothing, but later that evening he found himself in the unprecedented position of trying to comfort his Jewish accountant. "I'm sorry for your loss," Weber said awkwardly. Rosen looked at him with surprise. "Thank you, Mr. Weber. That means more than you know." It was the first time Weber had ever acknowledged the humanity of one of his workers, and the moment marked the beginning of his transformation from exploiter to protector. The change accelerated when Weber learned the truth about the resettlement camps. Through his SS contacts, he discovered that places like Auschwitz, Treblinka, and Sobibor weren't labor camps at all. They were extermination facilities designed for mass murder. Every deportation was a death sentence. Weber began making small changes. He hired additional Jewish workers, claiming increased production demands. He provided slightly better food, arguing that healthier workers were more productive. He created non-essential jobs for children and elderly workers, insisting they were necessary for factory operations. Hartman noticed. "Weber, your labor costs are increasing while your production barely improves. You're becoming sentimental about these Jews." "I'm protecting my investment," Weber replied. "Trained workers are valuable. It takes time to replace them." But Weber's real education came through his growing relationship with Samuel Rosen, the accountant. Sensing Weber's shift in attitude, began sharing stories about the workers, their previous lives, their families, their dreams. Mrs. Goldman was a concert pianist, Rosen told him one evening as they reviewed production reports. She performed at the Vienna State Opera. Now she cleans your office floors. Dr. Stern was a professor of literature at Jagiellonian University. He taught students about Goethe and Schiller. Now he sweeps factory floors because his hands shake too much from hunger to do detailed work. Each story was a weight added to Weber's conscience. These weren't anonymous laborers. They were individuals with histories, talents, and loved ones. They were people who had been stripped of everything except their will to survive. The turning point came in March 1943, when Weber learned that the Krakow ghetto was scheduled for complete liquidation. Every remaining Jew would be either shot on sight or deported to Auschwitz, including all of his workers. That night, Weber made a decision that would define the rest of his life. "Samuel," he said, calling Rosen into his office, "how many people work for me?" "Currently 847, Mr. Weber. I need that number to be larger." "Much larger." Rosen stared at him. "Sir?" "I'm going to create more positions. Essential positions. War-critical jobs that require specific, irreplaceable workers." Understanding dawned in Rosen's eyes. "You're going to protect them." "I'm going to try." "Why?" The question hung in the air between them. Weber was quiet for a long moment. "Because someone has to. And because ... because I can't be the man I've been anymore." That decision would cost Weber his fortune, his social standing, and nearly his life. But it would also save 1,200 people from certain death. Creating the list required careful planning, incredible bribery, and enormous personal risk. Weber couldn't simply declare his workers essential. He had to make Nazi. Bureaucrats believe that losing these specific individuals would damage the war effort. Working with Samuel Rosen, Weber began documenting every worker's skills in exaggerated detail. A former violinist became a precision instrument calibrator. A retired teacher became a quality control specialist. A housewife became an essential production coordinator. But the list was more than just job descriptions. It was a careful balance of truth and fiction designed to navigate Nazi bureaucracy while protecting human lives. "We need to make them indispensable," Weber explained to Rosen as they worked late into the night. "Every name needs a justification that sounds critical to someone who doesn't understand the actual work." The challenge was enormous. Weber was essentially arguing that 1,200 Jewish workers were so vital to German war production that they couldn't be replaced or relocated. In a system designed to eliminate Jewish people entirely, this argument bordered on treasonous. Weber began spending enormous amounts of money on bribes. SS officers, local administrators, and government bureaucrats all received gifts, expensive watches, artwork, cash payments in exchange for processing paperwork and approving exemptions. "You're protecting too many workers," Hartmann warned during one inspection. "Other factory owners are managing with smaller Jewish workforces. Your numbers seem ... excessive." "My production quotas are higher," Weber replied smoothly. "I have government contracts that require specialized skills. I can provide documentation for every worker's essential status." But Weber's biggest challenge wasn't bureaucratic. It was moral. Creating the list meant choosing who lived and who died. For every name he added, there was another potential worker he couldn't save. The weight of those decisions haunted him. "I can't save everyone," he confessed to Rosen one evening. "You're saving more than anyone else is even trying to save," Rosen replied quietly. Weber also faced resistance from some of his own workers. Many Jews had become suspicious of any German who claimed to want to help them. They'd seen too many false promises, too many betrayals. "Why should we trust you?" asked Dr. Miriam Brenner, a former physician who now worked in quality control. "What do you gain from protecting us?" Weber struggled to answer. The truth was that protecting them cost him everything: money, social status, safety, peace of mind. What did he gain? I gained the ability to sleep at night, he finally said. As the Krakow ghetto liquidation approached, Weber's list grew to 1,200 names. Each name represented not just an individual, but often entire families that Weber was trying to keep together. Children were listed as apprentices. Elderly parents became supervisors. Spouses were designated as essential support staff. The list became Weber's obsession. He carried it with him everywhere, constantly revising it, adding names, making changes. Samuel Rosen watched this wealthy German businessman transform into someone he barely recognized, someone who cared more about saving lives than saving money. "Mr. Weber," Rosen said one day, "you know that what you're doing could get you executed for treason." Weber looked up from the list he was copying for the third time that day. "I know. Why are you risking everything for us?" Weber set down his pen and was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I spent the first 40 years of my life thinking only about myself. I've seen what that world looks like, and I can't live in it anymore." The final version of the list was completed on March 12, 1943, the day before the ghetto liquidation was scheduled to begin. 1,200 names, each carefully documented with job descriptions, skill assessments, and production necessity justifications. But having the list was only the beginning. Now Weber had to make sure it worked. When the Krakow ghetto liquidation began, Weber's factory became an island of relative safety in an ocean of horror. While SS troops moved through the ghetto shooting anyone they found, Weber's workers huddled in the factory dormitories he had hastily constructed, listening to gunfire and screaming from across the city. Weber himself stood at the factory gates with his list, checking off names as his workers arrived. Many came running, having fled their homes with nothing but the clothes they wore. Others carried small bundles containing photographs or family heirlooms, the only pieces of their former lives they could save. "Check the list twice," Weber told the guards he had stationed at the entrance. "Every person who enters must be documented as essential to war production." Clara Rosen arrived with her father in the early morning hours, her face pale with terror. She had witnessed SS officers shooting children in the street, executing anyone who moved too slowly or couldn't prove their usefulness. "Mr. Weber," she said quietly, "they killed the Goldberg family, all of them, even the baby." Weber nodded grimly. He had seen enough to know that the scope of the killing was beyond anything he had imagined. This wasn't just deportation, it was systematic extermination. Over the next 3 days, Weber's factory absorbed not just his listed workers, but dozens of others who managed to escape the liquidation. Weber faced a terrible choice: follow his list exactly and turn away refugees, or expand his protection and risk drawing attention from SS authorities. He chose expansion. "We need more barracks," he told his construction foreman, "and more kitchens. We're going to have more workers than planned. Sir, the SS has quotas for Jewish workers. If we exceed authorized numbers... let me worry about the SS." Weber spent those days moving between his office, where he was frantically creating documentation for additional workers, and the factory floor, where he was trying to maintain the appearance of normal production while housing hundreds of terrified refugees. The strain was enormous. Weber barely slept, ate little, and spent every waking moment either bribing officials, creating false paperwork, or reassuring workers that they were safe. He was risking everything: his business, his fortune, his life, for people he had once viewed as nothing more than cheap labor. Hartman arrived for an unscheduled inspection on the 3rd day of the liquidation. "Weber, I'm told your factory is overstaffed." "Increased production demands," Weber replied, showing Hartman forged government contracts. "Berlin has requested expanded output for the Eastern Front." Hartman studied the document suspiciously. "These contracts seem generous." The war effort requires sacrifices from all of us, Weber said, handing Hartmann an envelope containing a gold watch and a substantial cash payment. Some of us sacrifice comfort. Others sacrifice efficiency for the greater good. Hartmann pocketed the envelope, but continued to look skeptical. I want to inspect your worker quarters. Weber's heart raced, but he maintained his composure. Of course. Though I should warn you, we've had to implement strict hygiene protocols due to overcrowding. Disease prevention, you understand. The inspection lasted 2 hours. Weber walked beside Hartmann, explaining every detail of the factory's operations, while secretly praying that none of the workers would do anything to reveal the true nature of what was happening. Clara Rosen was working at her usual station, painting delicate roses on porcelain cups. Her hands were steady despite the terror Weber knew she must be feeling. That girl, Hartmann said, pointing at Clara. She's quite attractive. One of my most skilled workers, Weber replied quickly. Her precision is essential for the detailed work required by our military contracts. Perhaps she could be useful in other ways. I'm afraid her skills are non-transferable, Weber said firmly, and absolutely essential to current production. After Hartmann left, Weber collapsed into his office chair, emotionally and physically exhausted. Samuel Rosen found him there an hour later, staring at his hands. Mr. Weber, are you all right? Weber looked up at the man who had become something between an employee and a friend. Samuel, I need you to know something. If this doesn't work, if they discover what we're really doing here, I want you to know that I tried. Rosen sat down across from Weber's desk. You're not just trying, Mr. Weber. You're succeeding. 1,200 people are alive today because of what you've done. But for how long? For today. And today is all any of us have. That conversation marked a turning point in Weber's understanding of his own actions. He had been thinking in terms of ultimate success or failure. Either he would save everyone, or he would fail completely. Rosen helped him understand that salvation was measured in days, hours, individual moments of safety in an unsafe world. The factory became more than just a workplace. It became a community. Weber found himself drawn into the daily lives of people he was protecting. He attended makeshift weddings, mourned deaths from illness and exhaustion, celebrated small victories like successful food deliveries, or avoided inspections. But Weber's greatest challenge was still ahead. In early 1944, he learned that all Jewish workers in the region were to be transferred to concentration camps, regardless of their essential status. His list had protected them this long, but now he would need something more powerful than paperwork. He would need a miracle. In January 1944, Weber received the order he had been dreading. All Jewish workers in the Krakow region were to be transferred to Auschwitz, concentration camp within 2 weeks. No exceptions, no appeals. The final solution was entering its most aggressive phase. Weber stared at the official document, signed by Heinrich Himmler himself, and realized that everything he had built was about to be destroyed. 1,200 people who trusted him to keep them safe were about to be murdered, and there was nothing his money or influence could do to stop it. That night, Weber made the most desperate decision of his life. Samuel, he said, calling Rosen to his office, we're moving the factory. Sir? All of it, the entire operation. We're relocating to my hometown of Zwickau. Rosen stared at him. Mr. Weber, that's impossible. You can't just move 1,200 people across Nazi Germany. I can if they're essential war workers being transferred to increase production efficiency. Weber's plan was audacious beyond belief. He would claim that the Krakow facility was being shut down for expansion, and that all workers were being temporarily relocated to establish a new production facility in Zwickau. The workers would travel by train, the same trains used to transport Jews to death camps, but instead of going to Auschwitz, they would go to a new factory that Weber would build from scratch. The plan required perfect documentation, enormous bribes, and incredible luck. One suspicious official, one missing piece of paperwork, one worker who looked too sick or too old, and the entire operation would be exposed as an elaborate rescue mission. Weber spent every penny he had and liquidated every asset he owned. He sold his apartment, his car, his art collection, his jewelry, everything. The money went to bribes, transportation costs, and construction of a new factory that would exist primarily to keep his workers alive. "Mr. Weber," Clara Rosen said, approaching him as he supervised the packing of factory equipment, "why are you doing this? You could just let us go. Save yourself." Weber stopped what he was doing and looked at the young woman who had somehow become symbolic of everyone he was trying to protect. "Clara, 3 years ago I thought people were either useful or useless. I divided the world into profit and loss. But you and your father and everyone else here taught me something I should have learned long ago." "What's that?" "That the most important things in life can't be bought or sold. They can only be given freely." The train journey to Zwickau was the most terrifying experience of Weber's life. 1,200 Jewish workers, packed into cattle cars that were identical to those used for deportations to death camps, trusting that Weber's plan would work. If German authorities decided to inspect the train, or if the paperwork was questioned, everyone would be sent directly to Auschwitz. Weber rode in the locomotive with the SS guards he had bribed to escort the worker transfer. For 18 hours, he maintained the fiction that this was a routine industrial relocation, while secretly praying that his forged documents would pass inspection. When they arrived in Zwickau, Weber's new factory was little more than a shell. Empty buildings with no equipment, no dormitories, no infrastructure. But it was better than Auschwitz. "We'll build it together," Weber told his workers as they stood in the empty factory courtyard. "All of us." And they did. Over the following months, Weber and his workers constructed not just a factory, but a functioning community. They built dormitories, kitchens, workshops, and even a small school for the children. The factory produced shells for the German army, enough to satisfy inspectors, but Weber secretly ensured that most of the ammunition was defective. Weber was no longer a wealthy businessman. He lived in a small room adjacent to the factory, ate the same food as his workers, and spent every waking moment ensuring their survival. He had transformed from exploiter to protector, from war profiteer to saboteur. But the greatest test was still to come. In April 1945, with Allied forces approaching from all sides, SS headquarters issued orders for the immediate execution of all Jewish workers in remaining factories. The war was ending, and Nazi leadership wanted to eliminate all evidence of their crimes. Weber received the execution order on a Tuesday morning. By Thursday, SS troops would arrive to carry out mass killings. He had 2 days to save 1,200 lives one final time. Weber's final act of salvation was also his most desperate. With SS execution squads en route and no time for elaborate plans, he made a decision that could only be described as mad courage. He gathered all 1,200 workers in the main factory hall and told them the truth. "In 2 days, SS troops will arrive to execute everyone here," he said quietly. "I can't stop them through official channels, but I can give you a choice." The hall fell completely silent. "We can hide you. There are underground tunnels beneath this factory that connect to the forest. You could escape in small groups and try to reach Allied lines." "Or," asked Samuel Rosen, "or we can make a stand, together." Weber's plan was to barricade the factory and hold it until Allied forces arrived. He had weapons hidden in the basement, pistols and rifles he had been secretly collecting for months. It wasn't much against a trained SS unit, but it was something. "I won't force anyone to fight," Weber continued, "but I also won't abandon anyone who chooses to stay." The vote was unanimous. All 1,200 workers chose to stay and fight alongside the German businessman who had risked everything to protect them. For 36 hours, Weber's factory became a fortress. Workers who had been forced into slave labor now stood guard with weapons, while others reinforced doors and windows. Children and elderly workers were moved to the safest areas of the building. Weber himself stood at the main entrance, rifle in hand, waiting for the SS troops to arrive. They never came. On the morning of the second day, instead of SS trucks, American tanks rolled into Zwickau. The war was over. Hitler was dead. The workers Weber had spent 3 years protecting were finally, truly safe. When the American soldiers entered the factory, they found something unprecedented. A German factory owner standing alongside 1,200 Jewish workers, all of them armed, all of them united, all of them alive. Colonel James Mitchell, commanding the American unit, later wrote in his report, "I have never seen anything like it. A German businessman who spent his entire fortune saving Jews, and Jews who were prepared to die fighting alongside a German. It was the most remarkable thing I witnessed in 4 years of war." Weber collapsed that day. The physical and emotional strain of 3 years spent walking the line between salvation and destruction had finally overwhelmed him. He spent 2 weeks in an American field hospital, being treated for exhaustion, malnutrition, and what doctors would later recognize as severe psychological trauma. When he recovered, Weber discovered that he had lost everything he once valued and gained everything that actually mattered. His business was gone. His fortune was spent. His social standing was destroyed. But 1,200 people were alive because of his choices. Samuel Rosen visited him in the hospital every day. "Mr. Weber, what will you do now?" Weber was quiet for a long time. "I don't know. I've never been poor before." "You're not poor," Rosen said quietly. "You're rich in ways most people never understand." After the war, Weber's story became legendary among Holocaust survivors, but he rarely spoke about it publicly. He moved to a small apartment in Munich, worked as a bookkeeper, and lived quietly until his death in 1974. But the people he saved never forgot. In 1962, Weber was invited to plant a tree at Yad Vashem, Israel's Holocaust memorial, and was designated as Righteous Among the Nations, an honor given to non-Jews who risked their lives to save Jewish people during the Holocaust. Weber attended the ceremony reluctantly. When asked to speak, he was characteristically brief. "I didn't save anyone," he said quietly. "I simply stopped participating in murder. That shouldn't be remarkable. That should be normal." But Clara Rosen, now Clara Goldman and a mother of 4 children living in New York, disagreed. "Mr. Weber," she said at the ceremony, "you saved our lives. But more than that, you saved our faith in humanity. You proved that even in the darkest times, people can choose light over darkness, life over death, love over hate. And," she continued, "you taught us that it's never too late to become the person you were meant to be." Heinrich Weber died quietly in 1974, attended by Samuel Rosen and several other survivors who had remained in contact with him throughout the post-war years. His funeral was attended by hundreds of people, the children and grandchildren of workers he had saved, friends and family members who owed their existence to his choices. On his desk, they found the original list minus 1,200 names, handwritten in fading ink, preserved as his most treasured possession. Today, that list is displayed at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington. D.C. visitors can read the names and see the careful documentation that Weber created to justify each person's survival. But more importantly, they can understand the transformation that turned a selfish businessman into one of history's most unlikely heroes. The Weber family tree now includes thousands of descendants of those original 1,200 workers. Doctors, teachers, artists, scientists, business leaders, all of them alive because one man chose to risk everything for people he had initially seen as nothing more than cheap labor. Clara Goldman, a young woman who had painted porcelain roses while the world burned around her, became a renowned artist whose paintings hang in museums around the world. She never forgot the German businessman who saved her life, and she spent decades documenting the stories of other survivors. In her final interview before her death in 2018, she was asked what she wanted people to remember about Heinrich Weber. "I want them to remember that good and evil aren't inherited," she said. "They're chosen. Every day, in small decisions and large ones, we choose who we want to be." Mr. Weber chose to be good when it cost him everything. That's not just heroism, that's hope. It means that anyone, anywhere, at any time, can choose to be better than they were yesterday. Samuel Rosen's grandson, David, became a historian specializing in Holocaust studies. He spent years researching Weber's story and interviewing survivors. "My grandfather always said that Mr. Weber didn't just save our lives," David wrote in his book about the Weber factory. "He saved our humanity. By treating us as people worth saving, he reminded us that we were people worth being." The Weber list stands as testament to the power of individual moral courage. In a system designed to reduce human beings to numbers, one man chose to see each number as a life worth saving. In a world that had forgotten the value of individual human dignity, one man remembered. And in remembering, he saved not just 1,200 lives, but the idea that even in humanity's darkest hour, light can overcome darkness, love can triumph over hate, and one person's conscience can change the world. The list that Heinrich Weber wrote in the basement of a porcelain factory in 1943 reminds us that we are all constantly writing our own lists, choosing who and what we value, deciding what we're willing to sacrifice for our principles, determining what kind of person we want to be when the world around us has lost its moral compass. So I ask you, what would be on your list? Who would you risk everything to save? And what does it take to transform from someone who sees others as useful or useless to someone who sees every life as infinitely valuable? Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us about someone who chose moral courage over personal safety, or a time when you had to decide between what was easy and what was right. And if this story moved you, subscribe to Vaulted Secret Stories. We remember the heroes who transformed darkness into light, preserve the stories that must never be forgotten, and honor the truth that every individual choice matters. Because sometimes the most important list you'll ever write is the one that saves someone else's life. Some choices echo through generations. Make sure yours echo in the right direction.